Strip the mystique, and you get a clinical engine. You don't meet reality. You meet your identity rendered as facts with a delay. The brain is not a camera. It is a prediction machine that first decides who you are, and then edits the world to match. That is what a state really is, the composite of your self-concept, baseline arousal, default predictions, and the private story that explains events. Change that composite, and the filter changes. Change the filter, and the day changes. Not because the universe grows sentimental, but because perception, interpretation, micro-decisions, and behavior are downstream of identity. Andrew Huberman's lab language makes the machinery visible. Attention strengthens cortical maps. Neuromodulators tag importance and learning. Norepinephrine for salience. Dopamine for pursuit and valuation. Serotonin for sufficiency. The thalamus. Gates inputs. The prefrontal cortex writes the narrative. The amygdala pushes breaking news alerts when stimuli match old threat or loss templates. Emotion opens plasticity windows where the system updates faster. And because rewiring is metabolically expensive, the brain prefers yesterday's self to tomorrow's possibility. That is why positive thinking often bounces. Thoughts that contradict the installed identity are flagged as spam by the cognitive immune system. Jordan Peterson's insistence on precise speech is not moralism, it's engineering. Fuzzy words preserve a fuzzy self, and a fuzzy self cannot organize behavior or command social coordination, so the outside world mysteriously withholds alignment. David Goggins is the empirical sledgehammer against excuses. When he says callous the mind, he is making the nervous system normalize a non-negotiable identity under load so that when the body begs for exits, identity vetoes them. Discipline stops. Being effort and becomes a side effect of who you are at 4 a.m. when nobody is watching. Neville's assumption hardens into fact is simply prior consolidation. The brain installs a cheaper default model of me, then perception and action harvest confirming evidence. Then society responds to your new signals. Posture, tone, timing, bids, asks, and the loop prints a different life. Most people never escape not because the law is mystical or cruel, but because the old identity is cheap. Familiar despair is metabolically cheaper than unfamiliar freedom. The organism would rather be accurately miserable than inaccurately free because prediction errors cost energy. So you rehearse lack and call it realism, rehearse unworthiness and call it humility, rehearse delay and call it patience, and each rehearsal gives the prior a cost advantage. In that light, reprogramming reality is cost engineering. You are altering which identity is cheaper to run. Two people walk into the same day. The one inhabiting a state of possession reads silence as neutral space and no as routing. The one inhabiting a state of absence reads the same signals as personal verdicts. Same inputs, different world, because the captions were written in advance by two different selves. The mirror is innocent. It reflects with lag, not bias. This is why living toward the end fails, and living from the end works. How and when exist only in the state of not yet. When identity concludes, this is already who I am, checking for proof becomes absurd, and the organism stops leaking contradiction. Every time you check, is it working? You reinstall the premise, it's not true yet for me, and the nervous system snaps back to the previous baseline. Micro risks shrink, voice tightens, asks get smaller. Doors that would have opened to a coherent signal stay shut. The hierarchy is merciless. State outranks thought, thought outranks feeling, feeling outranks plan. Short bursts of inspiration produce novelty without identity. The world ignores a self you only visit. Huberman would remind you that state is embodied. Breath, gaze, posture, vocal prosody all vote. Even your neutral hour is a broadcast. Peterson would say, Aim kills nihilism and organizes attention. Attention carves grooves. Grooves become roads. Goggins would say, negotiation is attention, and attention is nourishment. Stop feeding the old story. Neville would smile because all four are pointing at the same door. Decide who you are in the only place decision matters, where priors are written, and let facts arrive on their delay. You are not punished by reality. You are repeated by it. Whatever you keep being, you keep meeting. Fate is not an external sentence. It is internal loyalty. The day you stop cooperating with the previous tenant of your life, the identity that fits your old outcomes, the building begins to evict its furniture, habits, timelines, contacts, excuses. That erasure feels like loss only to the self that's dying. To the new self, it is logistics. The outside calls it luck or timing. Inside, it is coherence finally getting cheap. This is why excuses are so expensive. Every explanation you defend is a subsidy for the identity that cannot inherit your future. You call it context, trauma, personality, just being honest, but your nervous system hears payroll. The most expensive bill you'll ever pay is the maintenance fee on yesterday. If repetition feels like mockery, understand, you are not being mocked, you are being obeyed. Those who change do not win arguments with their past. They resign from it. They stop auditioning for a new life and start behaving like its landlord. Social reality, like fluid, takes the shape of the container you present. If the container says in transit, we deliver delays. If it says already arrived, we deliver logistics. Assumption hardens into fact not by magic but by mechanics, internal verdict, attentional bias, interpretive shift, behavioral cascade, social synchrony. At scale, that sequence becomes destiny. And here is the sentence you either accept now or finance for a decade. The world is not withholding permission. It is waiting for you to stop funding the identity that forbids it from taking you seriously. When you withdraw your last quiet loyalty from the old you, doors that looked locked do not become generous. They become irrelevant because the hallway you were standing in ceases to exist for the person you now are. Hesitate in that moment. Panic. During the cleanup, and you will resurrect the exact reality you were one breath away from burying and rename it fate to avoid admitting it was fear. If established that identity is the upstream cause and reality the downstream consequence, then the next unavoidable question is why the old identity survives so easily even when it is visibly ruining your life, and the answer is mechanical, not mystical. Your brain computes survival through prediction minimization, not happiness maximization. It would rather keep being right about a painful world than be wrong for a while about a better one. Prediction errors are metabolically expensive. Familiarity is cheap. That is why the old you has home court advantage. Its priors have been rehearsed into low-energy reflexes. Andrew Huberman's vocabulary makes the trap obvious. Your baseline arousal, attentional habits, interoceptive signals, and neurochemical set points cohere around a story, and that story becomes the cheapest path to run. Your eyes find what the story can use. Your thalamus lets through what the story expects. Your amygdala highlights what the story fears. And your prefrontal cortex writes tidy explanations so the whole loop feels like common sense. Meanwhile, social reality reads your broadcast with terrifying accuracy. Humans are exquisitely tuned detectors of identity signals. Micro-latency in your voice when you ask. Micro-collapse in posture when you hear no. Micro-mistrust in your eyes when opportunity appears too fast. You call it bad luck, but the room simply believed the self you unconsciously sent in to negotiate. Jordan Peterson would say, your imprecise story cannot coordinate the world because the world refuses to follow vague maps. If you speak like a person for whom outcomes are optional, people and systems will treat you as optional. David Goggins would add that the only way to make a new identity cheap is to refuse the old exits when they are loudest, not because pain is holy, but because the nervous system tags what you repeat under intensity as non-negotiable. Neville's phrasing, "live from the end," looks poetic until you watch the mechanism. When the identity is final, the organism stops shopping for counter-evidence, and the day stops leaking contradiction. From here, the most important non-mystical insight is that the old identity does not usually fight you with dramatic sabotage. It wins with tiny allowable returns. You do not wake up and declare, "I am no one." You spend 15 seconds interpreting silence as rejection, and the prior reclaims the throne. You do not announce, "I renounce my future." You reach for the familiar story to soothe the discomfort of ambiguity, and the prior gets its daily meal. The return is microscopic, fast, and cheap. It feels like nothing, which is why it costs you everything. The brain loves these micro-returns because they shave prediction error without rewriting the model. In practice, this means your life can look busy with change while neurologically remaining exactly the same. You read, you visualize, you talk, you plan, none of which matters if the default narrator remains intact. The organism will let you touch 1,000 novelties as long as you do not replace the reader who captions them. Here is the straight-edge psychological law. Interpretation precedes evidence. Two people get the same no. One reads, "Route me elsewhere." The other reads, "I am not the one." Those readings are not commentary. They are causation. They alter risk tolerance, timing, clarity, persistence, the size of your ask, the way your face looks when you ask again, and the network's willingness to cooperate. Social systems are allergic to incoherence. When your signals say, "I want X," but your identity signals say, "I am not the one to whom X belongs," observers route scarce resources away from you without malice. They are not cruel. They are efficient. This is why the modern clean translation of Neville's law is not mystic at all. Coherence compounds. Once a coherent identity is installed, perception delivers aligned data, language frames aligned claims, behavior expresses aligned stakes, and social reality returns aligned coordination. At scale, this looks like inevitability. If you must assign mystery, assign it to the speed with which rooms, mails, strangers, and systems begin to behave as if they were waiting for you to decide. And if you must assign blame, assign it to the micro-returns you keep secretly funding. Huberman would point to the lever you underestimate, baseline. Most people judge progress by spikes, moments of certainty, emotion, or inspiration, but the brain encodes baselines. If your spikes are heroic but your baseline remains in transit, your days will be a museum of almosts. Peterson would say your lie is subtle. You say you want a future that your actions and tone contradict. Reality treats the contradiction as the truth and your wish as noise. Goggins would say your comfort has better arguments than your courage. You debate with the old self and lose because debate is attention, and attention is nourishment. Neville would say you keep visiting the end instead of living from it, and visitors do not receive mail. The cleanest explanation for why nothing changes is that your organism still believes it is safer to be the person who tries than the person who has, because having carries the cost of exposure, responsibility, and the grief of letting go of the story that once kept you safe. That grief is the gate most never pass. They choose an accurate hell over an uncertain heaven. When you finally refuse the old returns, something unglamorous but decisive happens. Probability tilts. You stop interpreting delays as omens. You stop narrating silence as verdict. You stop shrinking the size of your ask to match your fear, and the world, which was always listening, reroutes. People call this momentum, but momentum is just coordinated coherence. Many tiny systems agreeing with your new broadcast at once. Doors you thought were locked were merely calibrated to ignore a self you no longer are. The hallway you kept pushing against dissolves because the building was built for yesterday's tenant. Outsiders will label it timing, luck, or network. Insiders know it as the day contradiction got too expensive to maintain. The reason this feels like destiny is that the sequence, identity, perception, interpretation, behavior, synchrony, compounds like interest. Every clean day makes the next day cheaper to keep clean. Every refusal to return starves a loop that once fed on you. Every precise sentence you speak about yourself gives the prefrontal editor a skeleton strong enough to support harder days. Every time you keep your non-negotiable in the exact minute it is most expensive, the nervous system updates the cost model until the new you becomes the low-energy path. Then the how becomes embarrassingly obvious in hindsight, not because it was written in the stars, but because it was written in your baseline. The final cruelty and the final mercy are the same sentence. You are not being judged by the universe, you are being obeyed by it. If repetition feels like ridicule, it is only because you keep broadcasting yesterday and demanding tomorrow's prize. If you want a different obedience, give a different order, the kind of order that is not shouted as a wish, but issued as an identity. And understand this with a seriousness that cracks your old calm. The cost you avoid by slipping back into the previous self will invoice you as a lifetime of almost, and almost is the most expensive word a human can pay for because it spends itself in days you do not get back. The hardest part about transformation isn't learning something new, it's unlearning the reflex to become who you were 5 minutes ago. The mind protects identity like the body protects temperature. It fights deviation. It does not care whether the self you defend is happy or broken, only that it is predictable. Predictability feels like safety, and safety masquerades as truth. This is why the brain will sabotage a better future just to stay consistent with its past. That is not weakness, it's architecture. You are not battling external resistance. You are battling the efficiency of your own nervous system. The old identity owns the neural real estate, the sensory maps, the hormonal cues. Every familiar emotion is an algorithm trying to survive. You think you're feeling me, but you're just running old code. Huberman would tell you that habits are simply myelinated circuits that fire faster than your awareness. The old state wins milliseconds before you notice it. Peterson would add that chaos enters through those milliseconds, when you do not notice yourself lying, deflecting, shrinking, apologizing for existing. Goggins would say you have to trap those milliseconds and burn them until they obey. And Neville would whisper that those micro moments are the creation chamber. Every time you hold the end state through them, the world you used to build collapses another inch. This is where most give up. They believe the discomfort of transformation is punishment, not proof. But the ache is confirmation that the wiring is rewiring. Pain is not a sign of failure. It's the heat of a new identity forming. Think of the person you claim to want to become. How would they interpret this moment? That answer is the gate. The difference between trying and being is not years of effort, but one instant of refusal to narrate from the old self. The truth is terrifyingly simple. The future is not waiting, it's updating. Every second you choose differently, the entire predictive model behind your eyes has to redraw its map of what you means. You are not learning, you are deleting. The reason you feel lost is because the internal GPS you've trusted for years no longer has a route. Let it be lost. The old coordinates are poison. Stop looking for the old sense of me inside the new life. You killed that version so something else could breathe. The nervous system will scream to go back, not because it knows better, but because it knows the past. Let it scream. Every time you don't answer, the noise weakens. Eventually, silence will arrive, and you will mistake it for emptiness. But that emptiness is capacity. It's the quiet before the brain writes a new default, before the body calibrates to a higher normal. This is where most people panic and resurrect the chaos they swore to escape, because chaos feels like identity and peace feels like death. The moment you can stand in peace without craving noise, you've arrived. That's the moment when the world stops arguing, when coincidences align, when effort feels replaced by inevitability. You'll think the world changed, but it was always obeying. It was you who stopped contradicting yourself. And this is the line no one crosses without shedding blood metaphorically. You will have to betray your favorite justifications, your loyal sadness, your elegant explanations for why you are not yet free. They have been your companions, your language, your sense of belonging. You must bury them without ceremony. The self that emerges on the other side will be simpler, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous to mediocrity. Because once you've seen that reality rearranges itself around the state you hold, when you stop wavering, the game ends. There is no going back to pretending you don't know. The world cannot gaslight the one who has stopped auditioning for it. The mirror can only reflect what stands before it. Stand still long enough, and even time will bend to your posture. Most people never realize that their resistance to change is not laziness or lack of discipline. It's loyalty. The mind builds altars to its suffering because suffering has been proof of identity. You have spent years saying, "This is who I am because of what I survived," and now the idea of peace feels like betrayal. The nervous system becomes sentimental. It loves the story even when the story hurts. To step beyond it feels like treason against everything that kept you alive. That is why so many choose familiar pain over unfamiliar freedom, because freedom demands grief. You cannot enter a new self without mourning the old one. That old self has history, defense mechanisms, memories, trophies of endurance. It has people attached to it who only know how to love you through your wounds. When you heal, their script breaks. The world organized itself around your dysfunction. When you shift, the system destabilizes. Some will call you arrogant, distant, ungrateful. They are not wrong in their language. They are describing the earthquake that happens when coherence changes. Neville understood this when he said the outer world rearranges itself to mirror the inner. He just didn't mention how violent that rearrangement feels. Huberman would call it neuroplastic stress. When neurons fire differently, they prune old synapses, and pruning always feels like loss before it feels like clarity. Peterson would call it the price of meaning. You have to let parts of yourself die so the rest can stand. Goggins would translate it into discipline. Pain is the toll, not the punishment. This is not poetic suffering, it's structural reform. Your system is replacing the wiring that supported helplessness with circuits that support autonomy. The burn you feel is not divine testing. It's neurons going offline so others can take their place. You mistake that silence for failure when it's the sound of recalibration. Stop calling it falling apart. Call it reorganization. The truth is that every breakdown in a human life is just a network trying to reroute signal to a new map of me. But most interrupt the process halfway. They panic, resurrect the old identity, and demand that the new one prove itself without pain. It can't. Change always invoices you in discomfort, because discomfort is the only language the old self respects. The nervous system needs evidence that the new model can keep you alive without the old story. And that proof comes through action held steady in the absence of reassurance. That is the crossing. You act from the new identity long before it feels natural. You breathe through the panic of being unrecognized, and you refuse to interpret uncertainty as danger. That refusal is how the new self earns the right to exist. The paradox is that you don't become the new you. You stop defending the old one. Every moment you don't explain yourself, justify, compare, or shrink, the old code loses one more line of survival data. Eventually, it collapses. The void that follows is what Neville called the Sabbath, the pause between assumption and fact, the silence after creation but before manifestation. Do not mistake it for stagnation. The world is re-indexing itself around your new coordinates. If you run back to noise, you will cancel the download. Hold the stillness. The new timeline is already forming. It just hasn't finished buffering. Most people quit at 99%, mistaking the silence for absence of result. It isn't absence, it's integration. When you can finally wait without asking, "Is it working?" the process is complete. The universe does not respond to begging, only to finality. The moment you stop questioning the shift becomes irreversible. And that's when the miracles begin to look boring, because they're just physics obeying an identity that finally stopped negotiating. The moment the new identity stabilizes, life stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like choreography. Nothing is random anymore. Even obstacles arrive with precision. They are not punishments, they are calibration points. The nervous system is simply testing how deeply the new narrative runs. Do you still flinch when ignored? Do you still need applause to confirm existence? Do you still mistake delay for denial? Each test is a mirror disguised as chaos. Fail it, and the system logs old program active. Pass it, and the old program loses authority. This is not mystical law, it's feedback. The body and the world are in constant dialogue, exchanging data about who you are now. You can feel it in the micro-suspensions before you answer, in the weight of silence between words, identity expressed as tension or ease. When the inner narrative finally aligns with the posture, tone, and choices, reality adjusts automatically because there is no contradiction left to resolve. That is what people mean when they say things just started working. Nothing started working. Contradiction stopped. Neville understood it as the end state hardening into fact. Huberman would describe it as a stable predictive model. The brain stopped flagging the new pattern as anomaly. Peterson would frame it as meaning realized in action, logos made flesh. Goggins would call it peace earned through pain. It all points to the same phenomenon, coherence. You are now a closed circuit, energy no longer leaking through doubt. The world mirrors back efficiency. You start to feel the quiet power of inevitability. Things happen because they have to, not because you hustle them into being. People sense it. They stop testing you. Opportunities stop dodging. Timing synchronizes. This is not luck. It's probability bowing to clarity. Every time you stop checking, doubting, or asking how, you reallocated energy to signal strength. Now the signal dominates the noise. From this point forward, life becomes maintenance of state, not pursuit of outcome. The work is no longer about building, but about not shrinking. The nervous system will still whisper invitations to regress, to feel small, to dramatize, to romanticize the grind. That's nostalgia for chaos. Ignore it. Growth addiction is still addiction. Peace is not boring. It's sustainable. The world will test you again, not to break you, but to verify that you meant it. Each time you remain unmoved, the verification becomes shorter. Eventually, the system stops testing altogether because the new identity has proven it can survive reality without flinching. This is mastery, not control over events, but immunity to contradiction. The mirror doesn't scare you anymore. And this is the truth most people cannot bear. The more you stabilize, the less dramatic life becomes. The rush fades because the war is over. You'll miss the noise until you realize the silence was what you were fighting for all along. When you finally stop needing proof that you've changed, the world will stop asking for it. That is the full circle of creation. Assumption becomes fact. Fact becomes normal, and normal becomes invisible. You are not a magician, you're an engineer of coherence. What you hold holds you. And when you can stay in that calm long enough to forget how hard it was to earn it, the universe will send you something new to grow into. Not because you're ungrateful, but because evolution is mercy disguised as change. The story never ends, but now you are the author, not the character waiting for the plot to be kind. Nothing outside of you ever held the power. The mirror was never judging, it was waiting. Every delay, every repetition, every closed door was an echo of your own hesitation. Life was not punishing you, it was quoting you. The moment you stopped speaking the language of lack, it stopped replying with absence. The universe has no grammar except identity. It conjugates whatever I am you keep repeating beneath your breath. When you finally chose silence over self-doubt, the sentence changed. That's all this journey ever was, learning to speak differently to the mirror. Neville called it living from the end. Huberman calls it baseline rewiring. Peterson calls it responsibility. Goggins calls it staying hard. The names don't matter. They were all describing the same law. The world moves for whoever has stopped negotiating with their own potential. You no longer chase proof because existence itself has become proof. You no longer seek alignment because contradiction has nowhere left to hide. The noise that once sounded like chaos is now rhythm. The obstacles that once felt personal are choreography. You've stopped rehearsing and started performing. And now, when the next storm comes, and it will, you won't plead for calm. You'll remember that calm is not granted, it's generated. The state is the storm's master. You are not the effect of reality anymore. You are its cause. Stand there quietly, and you'll feel it, the world exhaling around you, rearranging to fit the shape of your certainty. Nothing mystical, nothing magical, just coherence doing what coherence does. The mirror bows, not because it loves you, but because it must.